Hi and welcome to this video in the QPSMR CATI up and running series. And in this video we're going to look at managing your sample and your sample file that you need to create when you come to run a QPSMR CATI project. Now the usual starting point when you have a sample is to have that data in a spreadsheet. If it's not available in a spreadsheet, you probably need to get it into a spreadsheet so that you can make the necessary preparatory work so that it can go into a QPSMR CATI project. So we have a sample here, and if we just stretch these columns so it's a little bit more readable, and of course every sample file must have a telephone number, so at the very least you should have two columns, a serial number and a telephone number. This particular sample file's got a name, 3 lines of an address, a postcode, and then 2 bits of information here which are quite important, which is whether they're a member of an organization and whether they attended an event. And what we can do with other data in our sample file is we can use that for filters or to verify that they perhaps are still a member and they really did attend an event. But we can use this as filters, and it just comes through as data that will get saved with your project so that you can use it in analysis as well when you come to have your completed interviews. Now, what we're going to do with this data, this is that we're going to just do some work on these 2 fields, because these 2 fields need to be in your QDF as well. So we need to have an entry in the QDF called member and an entry called event so that that data gets pulled through. And indeed, all of these fields here, name, add 1, add 2, add 3, postcode and telnum, must all be in the as an entry in the QDF to pull them through. If there's any fields that you want to hide, you can put them in a less than and greater than. Now what I often do in this situation is that where I'm going to work on these 2 so that they end up in terms of code, so that yes is 1 and no is 2, I just normally just copy these columns across. So just copy, paste them here, and then I enclose these 2 fields in less than and greater than, so they have either have a different name, but B, more importantly, then that QPS will ignore them when we come to make our sample files in a little while. So let's just extend that again now, and you can see what I've done. Now we need to turn these into codes, so I want yes to be 1 and no to be 2 so that it matches my entries in my QDF, and we'll be going over to that in a minute. So I'm going to find and replace, and I'm going to find yes and replace it with a 1, 29 replacements, and I'm going to find no and replace it with a 2. And I've got 31 replacements. Now it is a good idea to just check that all of your file has been turned into codes. There wasn't somebody who was blank there, or perhaps with some other text like unsure or not given or something like that. All right, so that's made our sample file now in terms of codes. All of this information here can stay in terms of texts and telephone numbers, because the telephone number will be used for dialing. And these 2 fields are going to be ignored because they're enclosed in less than and greater than. Now to get this into our project to be used as a sample for the survey, for the interviewers to be able to use these as sample, we need to save this file as a CSV. So I'm going to save the people file here, pick the comma delimited one and save it. And you can now close it, and we should have a CSV file now. We just reopen it from the Explorer just to check it's all there. We should have a CSV file that is now exactly as we want it to bring into our project, and sure enough, there it is. All right, now let's return to our project, and if we do that, we can open up QPS here, and the project we have here is called projectaction.qdf. Now just to recap perhaps what was covered in a previous video, the introductory video to handling QPSMR projects, what we've actually done here is taken the skeleton file that comes, that's available as a tool to get your basic questionnaire together. In here you'll see after the, just widen this column, after the TTT sample start and before the TTT sample end, we've got the questions that are coming from the sample file. So the telephone number, the name, the address 1, 2, and 3, the postcode, and the member. So all that data is going to get drawn through from our sample file, and you will note that the question entries here must exactly match the names in the sample file. You can't give them different names. They must be spelt exactly right. Okay, so that's our fields we're going to pull in from the sample file. And down here, you'll see the questions which are the sort of real questions on the questionnaire. And of course, surrounding all that, as covered in the previous video, are all the controls, such as the appointment times, counting how many seconds each section of the questionnaire takes, and so on. But these are the basic parts of the questionnaire that I put into my template here, or the skeleton file, to build my questionnaire. Well, I'm now ready to build my sample file so that it's ready to go on to the next step. So let's do that. Let's go into data. Let's open the data window. It's going to turn on the data files exist switch because it's now going to expect to find some data. And it's looking for the name I'm going to give the file. Well, it's called Project Action, but we want to make a sample file that we can use as interviews for our survey. So we've got 30 people in that sample spreadsheet, and I'm going to call the sample file, it's called Project Action, the QDF. I'm going to call it Project Action spaced sample with a capital S .asc, and it's advised that you do the same thing when you run your projects. You always call your sample file sample.asc. Now open it, and it's told me the file is completely empty. Well, that's not a surprise to me because I haven't built the sample file now yet. And we can now update that from a CSV file, which is that CSV file we built called people.csv. So it asks whether I want to make an archive. We might as well say yes, it's a good habit to get into. We're going to pick people.csv. Let's open it. And it correctly spots that this is a portable file that we're importing here. So, and it's found the fields that we want. I'm going to check this new questionnaires to be created, because what we're going to make is a file with all the data that's come through from that sample.csv file here that we built just now. Click OK, and everything looks okay. I've got OKs everywhere I'd expected them, which is what I'd want, and I've got ignored here because the heading's not recognized because it's got less than and greater than. It's okay to proceed. We close this window. We can now close the data menu, and you'll see it asks me whether it's okay to build a sample index file. Well, it is, because we're ready now to do interviewing. So we click yes, and now my file is ready, and we're ready to go on to the next step, which might be building a quota file, but also carrying out interviewing. So having built the sample index file, that means the project's all ready now to be used for a survey. We'll probably want to set up some quotas, and that's covered in the next video. But your project now has a sample file that's ready to draw records from so that you can conduct interviews. Well, that completes this video. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you found it very useful.